Welcome to the More Business, More Life podcast. Our special guest today is Tim O'Hara, and I'm super excited because this is a man that went from going into corporate America, following his education after he got his degree, and then finding himself in the Peace Corps and rethinking things, and now has for 20 years now been in Costa Rica building an eco center, permaculture farming, and changing people's lives, having them come onto their space. And we're going to talk about how he came to make this big decision in life and how it's brought him to the place that he is now. And we can learn so much from this episode. So let's go. So welcome, Tim, to the show. I'm really excited about this conversation because farming and getting closer to the land and I'm not a farmer. I'm an early student, so I know I can learn a lot from you. But I'm very attracted to getting closer to the land. So I just want to share, and you've been doing this for years. So back in 2001, you chose to live in Costa Rica, build permaculture, sustainable eco lodge, and you're bringing people from all over the world to learn about this and even live with you. Like, you do periods of a year where they live with you. But I want to get into how you chose that and all that. But let's first start with where you are today. This is amazing. So maybe just share a little bit about your space in Costa Rica and what you're doing.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. I appreciate the invitation to be with you and looking forward to share a little bit about our story. I live in a small rural community called Mastatal. It's in the canton of Puriscal. It's about 3 hours from San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. It's a small community of about 100 people, very rural. And we have an education center, a sustainability education center there that my wife and I started in 2001. Her and I met in the Peace Corps in South America in the 1990s, and I can share a little bit more about that story perhaps later on. But after a couple of stints in the corporate world, her and I decided to start pursuing, the activities in life that really got us excited and got us up in the morning and got our wheels rolling. So we brainstormed quite a bit. We were living in Seattle post Peace Corps, and we're always open to the possibility of returning to Latin America, both Spanish speakers, and we just started to put together some ideas as to how we could start leading a more fulfilling and meaningful life. And we're both environmentalists at that time, budding environmentalists. We were gardening and, like you, interested in getting increasingly involved, immersed in growing our own food and composting and building our own furniture and structures. And after looking for programs perhaps to engage in ourselves, we found that there was kind of a lack of that type of offering out there. And so we started to think about ways that we could develop the space that we were looking for, and started to develop this idea of creating the place that we wanted to be learning in, and that was the Rancho Mastatal Sustainability Education Center. We offer a whole wide variety of educational programs, mostly related to sustainable living. Most of the topics fall, I guess, under the bigger umbrella of permaculture. So natural building, growing food in the tropics, agroforestry, wilderness medicine, fermentation, food processing, and a whole host of other topics. As you suggested, we have people coming through our space all the time. Our home is our workplace. We do have a year-long apprenticeship. So at any time, we have 7 year-long apprentices that live with us, that engage in the different educational opportunities that we offer that revolve around the different activities that I just outlined. We receive guests, high school groups, gap year programs, college university programs. We're also a working farm and a community. So as you can probably ascertain, it's a pretty dynamic place with a lot going on.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I probably never a dull moment. Just
Yeah.
always something. Yeah, that's beautiful. There's so many questions going through my mind. I guess just curious logistically, do you have other trainers come in and train, or do you and your team do all of the education at the facility?
Yeah, we do a lot of the teaching, but we do bring in outside teachers. In particular, when we would like to include a class or a course that we're not well versed in or experts at, and we're looking to build our skills throughout, our lives. And oftentimes, we'll be looking to incorporate a new skill into our campus, into our core team skill set. And so one of the exciting parts of our business is that we can really invite anybody to come down and teach about skills that we're really enthusiastic about. So it's a mixed bag. We increasingly do more teaching, I would say, just as we become quote unquote experts in a lot of these themes. But we really do enjoy bringing people from all over the world to help us improve our skill set and expand our knowledge base.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of those learnings as we go through this conversation. I guess what's most curious to me, being I think you were born in New York, right?
Yeah, upstate New York. Yeah, southern tier of New York State.
Yeah, it's and then just I think you have a lot of folks that hear these stories and and just wondering, part of more business, more life for me is choosing your life. And so, after you were in the Peace Corps, you came back, and it sounds like you had a stint in the corporate world. And that at that point, I guess I'm just looking at the moment of decision that you decided to leave that and decide to live in Costa Rica. Can you maybe share a little bit about, like, was it always the plan to do a short stint in the corporate world, or did you start it out thinking it was going to be the thing and then decide, what, I can't do this? Or how did that work for you?
Yeah, I think it was more the latter. And I don't know if I could, put my finger on a specific point in time when that all happened. I think for me, it was more of a process, more of these aha moments and meeting people and developing relationships with certain mentors that kind of changed the trajectory of my path, getting to an intersection in life and having to choose between one path or the other. And so I think for me, it was a years long process that maybe started after I left upstate New York. I grew up in the suburbs in a pretty conventional upbringing. Had a great family, went to school, and where I went to school in upstate New York, I was a little bit more progressive than the community that I had been raised in. So started to be, I guess, exposed to more, progressive ideas. Got introduced to this idea of caring for the environment, and I have a degree in agricultural economics, so I went through that curriculum at school and kind of came out the other end, perhaps with more questions than I went in with, and got a job with Chiquita, large agribusiness, as I was kind of training to do through my agricultural economics program. Got a job, moved to Philadelphia, lived there for a few years, working as a marketing analyst for a large agribusiness, and really just almost immediately became a little bit disappointed with that experience and started questioning what I was doing with my time and energy. Read a couple of books, met a couple of people there in the office that asked me some probing questions that made me think that there might be something else out there for me. That included the encouragement from one colleague to check out the Peace Corps and see about that experience. And so Peace Corps office just happened to be right across the street from my office, and went over there and put in an application. Eventually made my way to Uruguay and got introduced to the idea of permaculture. Bill Mollison's permaculture manual was in the library there, and started to continue to kind of think that there might be another way for me. But after Peace Corps, I had been accepted into an agroecological program at University of California, Santa Cruz, which I was really excited about, kind of along the lines of what I was doing in the Peace Corps, working with organic farmers and teaching organic gardening in the schools and soil fertility building strategies with the farmers there. And at that same time, I got offered another corporate job from my old boss at Chiquita, and she kind of wooed me back into that world. Social pressures, family pressures, financial pressures all made me forego the opportunity in agroecological studies at Santa Cruz. And so I moved to Seattle instead, went back into the corporate world, and another 2 years there before I was able to extract myself. But again, was pretty disheartened with what I was doing there, and decided after that to break ties with that lifestyle altogether, and then really started to look more deeply into what else was out there for me.
Well, thank you, Tim, for sharing. And I always appreciate when people are willing to open up and be vulnerable and share these things, because and it may be easy for us to do that today, but many people out there are not, and I also just want to bring up, I don't really believe in coincidences so much anymore. Like, it's amazing that the Peace Corps office was right across the street. It's like calling to you, it was right there. And then, it's kind of like your heart knew where it wanted to go. And I just want to take a moment. You mentioned, social and I think you said like family pressures and just that dynamics of, the quote unquote, what we're supposed to do, right, according to others, that pulled you back into the corporate world. Can you talk about, and maybe this is a vulnerable question, and I it might be putting you on the spot, but I appreciate this because, as we're not the only ones, that have this feeling. So can you maybe elaborate just a little bit on those transitions and how you navigated that?
Yeah. Again, it was, it was a bit of a process. Like I was saying earlier, I remember when I got the acceptance letter to the Peace Corps, they sent me a package, what I was going to be doing. I called my parents up, pretty excited. It was, pretty difficult to get in. The Peace Corps is a pretty competitive process. And so I was excited. I got my dad, he picked up the phone. I told him what had happened, and he asked me where I was. I told him, I was in my office in Philadelphia, and yeah, why? And he said, well, I'm coming to get you right now because, I don't want you to go to South America. So, at that time I had never been out of the country, lived a pretty isolated life up until that point. And yeah, there was real family pressure at that point in time not to, I guess, choose the alternative path. And I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My siblings kind of all went through the conventional steps to get to where they were at that point in their professional careers. And being the youngest, I guess I had a little bit more flexibility in in doing something different. But those pressures were real. The social pressures were real. I had just spent, all this time getting this degree, and it was meant to be, put to use in a certain way. And, my peers from college and from my professional life expected, me to lead my life in a certain way. And then, the financial pressures, as I also mentioned, coming out of the Peace Corps, it's a volunteer situation where you get a pretty small stipend. So returning to the United States post Peace Corps, I had to figure out what that was going to look like for me financially. How was I going to pay the bills and able to make ends meet? So all of those pressures, I think, are real and take a bit of overcoming. I think for me, it was influential just to meet people that had already, taken the alternative path. And I think a part of your work and why you're doing this, to share with others that there is another way, and there are other paths out there that are worthwhile and oftentimes, better. We're all designed differently. We're all wired differently. I think some people are well prepared and well suited for certain environments, and others for others. But I think our academic system, a lot of our kind of professional infrastructure guides us down a pretty narrow path. And as soon as you try to go off that path, there's a lot, pushing you back on. And to know that other people have done it and succeeded and found happiness, and not only that, thrived in an environment where perhaps they weren't in the one they came from. I think for me it was inspiring and a big part of my story. Without having met those other people, having made those decisions to do something else, it's hard to envision or imagine that there's anything else out there, especially when you're young in college and haven't been exposed to a lot of what else is possible.
Thank you for sharing that, Tim. And I think, just highlighting and almost echoing, is just meeting other people that have done it before, I think is what it sounds like was the leading factor that gave you the means, I guess, or the reasoning for yourself to overcome those fears and those other pressures to make that decision. What it sounds like it was a multitude of people, not like one person, or like you said, it wasn't like one moment. It was kind of an evolution. But if you let your mind go back, was there like a certain moment where it finally like tipped over, and then you're like, okay, this is it, I'm doing? Was it drastic, or did you have like a month's notice, or how did when we get to that point where you got to the decision? I'm curious how that moment transpired.
Yeah, I guess if I could put a specific event to it, it would be, in the office in Philadelphia, Chiquita, and this woman that I was working with had not too long before returned from Guatemala, where she had been living for a few years and working with the Peace Corps, and we got to know one another, and she, learned through that friendship, my hang-ups with the current lifestyle that I was following, and the hangups that I had with work in general, and getting to know my personality. She just suggested that I read a book called Bitter Fruit, which was about the overthrow of the Guatemalan democratically elected Guatemalan government in 1953 or 1954, when they overthrew the leader Jacobo Arbenz with the help of the CIA and the United Fruit Company, which then became Chiquita, which was the company that I was working with at the time. And she gave me a copy of that book, and I read it mostly while I was at work, and that really shifted immensely kind of my worldview, and made me connect some dots, and really made me question why I was doing what I was doing, asking questions that I had never asked before, coming out of high school, not really knowing what to do. You get kind of pushed into a career path for reasons that might not be fully developed or in your best interest. And that is the moment I kind of remember questioning that whole process in a more profound way for the first time. And after reading that book, I just decided it couldn't be working for this particular company, even though that was decades prior, but just the corporate structure that I had become a part of just wasn't one that felt right for me any longer. And yeah, that's not too long before I walked across the street there and applied, and then went into the Peace Corps. So I would say that was kind of the moment that I can most recall as being the most important and influential on the change in paths for me.
Beautiful. And so that was a moment while you were still a single guy, and then going to the Peace Corps. That's where you met Robin. So it wasn't, it was a decision on your own. You didn't have a partner at the time.
Yeah, it was a decision on my own. Yeah, exactly. And then, met my current wife there. And yeah, and that's also a big part of the story, her influence on who I've become since then and what I've decided to do. And but at that point, yeah, I was I was able to, I had the, I guess, the privilege of being able to make that decision and pick up and go. But going back to what we were talking about before, even that, once you set up in a spot, you have a good job, you have your 401k, and there's a lot of forces that are working against you making that change. And yeah, and those those are real, like I said, and take some time to make that shift and make that transition when you make what are big decisions in life. But no regrets by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I can feel it. I can feel you followed your heart and it's led you to an amazing path. So then just fast forwarding a little bit, you went into the Peace Corps, had that experience, and then you come back into the States with Robin at that point then. And then you did another stint in the corporate world. Is that am I getting the timeline right?
Yeah, pretty much. My wife Robin, she went into the Peace Corps a year after I did, so there was that year when I moved to Seattle, started my other corporate job while she was still finishing her stint in the Peace Corps. So she came and met back up with me in Seattle a year after. But yeah, since then we've been together.
Beautiful. And then how long was it? And thanks for letting me get so detailed. I think sometimes these details help other people make decisions because, it's fascinating. People sit, and I know I've been there. How am I going to do this? And just hearing these stories. So I just want to give my gratitude once again and letting me pry a little bit into sharing your life. But so when she came back, how long was it before you guys said, oh, we're out of here and let's go do this?
Yeah, it was about 5 years. We lived in Seattle together. She was, we both had a number of jobs while there. I went back, as I said, for the corporate gig, but was there for 2 years. Decided to get out. She started teaching school, and then she started her own jewelry business. She's an artist, and then started working at a fancy restaurant downtown Seattle, and started bringing home the bacon while I started to look at other options. I managed a canoe and kayak manufacturer for a while. I guided camping tours in Mexico and Western Canada and the US. And during that time, we were just trying to kind of find our place and figure out what it was that we wanted to do moving forward. We had a little garden there at our house that we rented. And we composted, and we were doing all the little activities that we were becoming increasingly interested, and it became increasingly obvious that it was something that we wanted to turn more into a living, and we wanted to really start going deeper into a lot of these activities that we were super jazzed about. And so yeah, we started to brainstorm. We decided to move to Oregon, to along the Columbia River Gorge. We whitewater kayakers there in the Northwest. We spent a lot of time in that region. It was more rural. Seattle was beautiful. We had a great community of friends, but it was beyond our means to buy a home there. We didn't want to move to the suburbs. We wanted to start growing more food. We decided then to move to Hood River, or outside Hood River in Oregon. And right about that time when we had made that decision, a friend of ours from the Peace Corps called me up on the phone and said that he had just been to Costa Rica, and he went to this small community where there was a property for sale. And him and I, as Peace Corps friends, had dreamt about the possibility of, doing a project together post Peace Corps, starting a farm, doing something in the environmental field in South America. But, never happened for a number of reasons, but we kept in touch. And when he called me up, he thought that this was a great spot to do it. We had been talking about back then. He convinced us to get on a plane to come down and check out the property. So my wife and I, Robin and I, did at that time, and we were in transition anyway. We had settled on Oregon, but we hadn't moved yet. We didn't have jobs there. And upon the trip to Costa Rica to check out the property, we returned to Seattle and started to brainstorm even deeper about, what it would be that we could do in Costa Rica that would allow us to make financial ends meet, but also meeting the goals that we had set forth for us as far as the lifestyle changes that we were looking to incorporate. And after a couple of weeks of running some numbers and writing down some ideas, we decided to basically take some steps forward in trying to purchase the property. And we kind of put Oregon on the back burner and moved Mastatal to the forefront of our world. And yeah, we were able to get creative and put the financing together and purchase the property where we currently have Rancho Mastatal. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, that's so so beautiful. And thank again, thanks for sharing that. And so then you're able to, go through that process, have all those things, and over that period of time just continue to follow your heart, it sounds like, and got you to and it made sense. And then you also had the awareness to, because of all the things that you experienced. And that's where even I look at, even your corporate life and like running the numbers and all those things, you're able to do that based on the other things that you learned and then be able to make that decision. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, even though some of these experiences in your life aren't the most memorable or the most enjoyable, all experiences are valid and contribute to who it is that you become in the end and influence the path that you take. And even though the corporate years weren't the favorite, my favorite years to think back on, a lot of good came out of that. I learned a lot in particular about what I didn't want to be doing or didn't want to be contributing to, but also, just a lot of hard skills that when starting your own business are invaluable. I mean, just to be able to do some basic financial analysis and a lot of the skills I got out of college and out of that corporate experience, or those corporate experiences, really did set us up well in a lot of regards. And that's definitely an important part of the story.
Yeah, well, and congratulations on that. And we'll start transitioning into, I want to talk about some farming and some other stuff here, but I think, just another curious point that just came into my mind is, what was it like, being United States citizen, and then, going to Costa Rica, buying that property. I know a lot of people move to Costa Rica, so a lot of expat, as they call it. Was that an easy process, or was that troublesome in any way? Just curious.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was an easy process. Moving to another country requires a fair amount of change in your life and a lot of movement and transition. And transition can be challenging. Wrapping up business in one country and starting a business in another requires a lot of details and a lot of moving around and a lot of setting up, and definitely took us a fair amount of time and energy to do. The decision, after having lived in Latin America for a few years, was a little bit easier in that we had already lived abroad, so it wasn't our first crack at being somewhere else. So we had a little bit, I guess, of the cultural sensitivity and being able to navigate in another Latino culture under our belts already, which I think was really helpful for us. And yeah, like you suggested, there are a lot of expats here in Costa Rica. We, moved to a community that didn't have any telephones, that had very poor access. And so our connection with the expat community in Costa Rica, the first decade or so, was more or less non-existent, just based on where we decided to go. Just to do this, just to check my internet back then, just to check my emails, was a 2-hour trip into Jaco or Quepos to a community where I could get, an internet connection that has changed a lot over the last decade. But it was a much different landscape back then. And yeah, it required a lot of trips to town and a lot of headaches and a lot of, trips to bureaucratic institutions. But, I think that's just part of of any move outside of the country, or really any move from one place to another. I wouldn't say, it wasn't insurmountable. Obviously, I'm still here, and a lot of other people have done it too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did get to live in Australia for a period of time. And even with that being English speaking, so I didn't have to have, that there was still different cultural differences, and just the fact of, selling everything and then moving to, overseas. I can have a little bit of relation to that. And so I understand. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then with the transitioning a bit into the land and some of the other things I'm excited to talk to you about and share with our audience. What was this? Was this just bare land? Was it already a center, education center, or farming, or how did that go about?
Yeah, no, it was just mostly raw land. There was an old structure on it, a 50 or 60-year-old concrete Tico house, just a kind of a standard rural farmhouse there, which was great. It allowed us a roof to live under for those first years as we got our feet wet, and as we were able to get a bit established. We had pretty limited resources when we landed there. We actually drove down from Seattle. We drove a couple of our vehicles down through Mexico and Central America to get there. So it was quite the adventure to get there. But once we got there, we basically just hit the ground running and prioritized projects. We had done a lot of groundwork prior to going down, making contacts, having meetings with potential groups that wanted to come and have the experience like the one that we were trying to put together. We were able to kind of secure a group coming down, a high school group from interior Alaska, about 6 weeks after we got to Costa Rica on November 1st, 2001. So we, arrived there with the need to, basically figure out how to be able to accommodate a group of 12 students from interior Alaska. And it was, pretty stressful at that time.
Did you say 6 weeks?
Yeah, it was a little bit insane. And I remember the bus, their vehicle pulling up, and the electricity had just gone out in town. The following day, the water went out. These are problems sometimes in rural Costa Rica that are part of life, and us having to haul water from the river to flush the toilets, and it was quite the learning experience. But we were also in the situation whereby we had to start bringing some revenue in, because we had spent most of what we had at that point on a down payment, and we were pretty tight in the financial department. So those were tight times for sure. And a little touch and go at times, figuring out whether we could meet payroll and all of the, the adventures of the early days of starting your own business. It certainly, was a big part of our story. But little by little, there's a saying here in Costa Rica called poquito a poco, little by little. It's an adage that we turn to all the time. If you zoom out and look at the big picture, it's easy to get overwhelmed about everything that there is that you have to do. And so I think it necessitates this ability to really zoom in a lot and not get overwhelmed by the big picture, but just have your list and your priorities and tick off what it is that you have to get done, whether it's making a meal for a group or, finishing a piece of furniture that a future guest is going to be using. It was really important to start to learn some of those strategies to be able to, figure out how to get from one day to the next without feeling like we had made, a terrible decision.
That makes sense, Tim. And it's one thing that I teach when I work with a lot of executives is, the overwhelm. I think, so many of us in all walks of life, we can easily overwhelm ourselves with all the tasks at hand to live the life that we want to live. And really, like I always use the metaphor, if you're building a house, you don't put on your calendar, build house, tomorrow, build house, Wednesday, build house. It's like you're going to say, okay, I got to flatten this land. Then I've got to frame a foundation, pour a foundation. Well, however you're going to do it, you're going to put the step by step. And I think, one other metaphor to add on, I use often is, if you take a bite of food and you take too big of a bite and you start to choke, and then you start to realize you can't breathe, and you're having that feeling, and then you get it out, and you clear the pipe and you're able to breathe, then you're probably not, there's a high chance you're not going to take the same size bite. And then I look at entrepreneurs, and it's like they're taking that big bite every day, almost choking, and then they wonder why. And I've done this, so I'm not speaking from like just pointing fingers. I've actually done this to myself, and then realize, you know what? It's all about what you say, the little by little, like taking and breaking it down into the simple steps, then anything's accomplishable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. You have to set, small attainable goals on the day to day. You have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, obviously, and strategize and plan and figure out your pathway forward. But on a day to day basis, I think you're absolutely right. You really have to break it down to attainable tasks and take stuff off the to-do list, and that feels great to me whenever I get to do that. And yeah, you can't take off the build house from your list, like you said, for many months, whereas you can plumb the kitchen sink, and you can install the light bulb, and you can do the little tasks, and before you know it, your house is done. But you go through it in a much more controlled process that doesn't drive you crazy, that doesn't overwhelm you.
Yeah, I have this all makes sense, and I have so many questions. Some of them I'm gonna you and I'll have to talk even more. Maybe we'll do another podcast, because one of the things, as we've been running retreats, but I've been using other retreat centers, and I live on a little bit of land now, but not enough to have like overnight stays. And so, this has been a big topic of like where I'm taking myself and my family, because I definitely have a vision of, living with the land, living with the food, and then being able to, because part of More Business, More Life is to take people out of the offices, out of those day-to-days, to experience something different, which is in a way what the story was for you, because you were in that academic situation, then the corporate situation, and then to get pulled out of that, to live abroad, to work with the Peace Corps, was kind of a longer one. We don't expect people to do it for years at first, but hey, come for a couple week retreat or a week retreat and have that experience and make an impact on their life. So I want to transition into that, how that impact, and in two parts, like one into the lives, but maybe let's talk about farming first, like the what you've created there in your space. And I think this is really important. I've as I've looked and listened to different folks, I'm becoming a believer that one of the biggest ways we can change the climate of this planet is through farming. Like the monocrop farming is, from my what I'm seeing and what I'm learning, is one of the biggest culprits to the degeneration of our climate on this planet. I guess I'm curious if you would agree, and then like maybe share some of these things that permaculture and poly farming, like bringing many crops into one situation. I presume that you've been doing that there in Costa Rica.
Yeah, food production and food security is definitely one of the pillars of our educational programming, as well as what we do in the day to day. So yeah, a lot to think about with that question. It's obviously
it's a huge, gigantic one. Yeah. So here, let me try to dig it down into something simpler, like the awareness of, I guess, what do you think? I think there's a number of things that are important, from just what I've been learning, and maybe you can highlight a few more, or maybe like elaborate on a few of them, but like one is obviously like the chemicals that get laid down onto the ground under some of these farmings. And then also just the thing that's become real aware to me is just the monocrop, like having thousands of acres with like one plant. And, just when you look at the farms that have this ecosystem, it just comes to life, and not just the plants themselves, but the habitat, the insects, and working with the animals, and having all of that come together. And for you, I know this has been decades of your life's work, but for some people, just in the last couple of years, they're just becoming aware of this. I guess in all of this, is there like a, one or two highlights of the things that are most important that we should be thinking about when it comes to the way that we produce food and the way that we treat the land?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And how you grown food there in the States is, different than how it's being grown here. How you should be growing food there in the States is different, perhaps, than how you should be growing it here. So, you know, I guess the first thing I'll say is that, we're not self-sufficient with regards to food production as a farm. And that I think is really important for people to think about and wrap their heads around. I think like when people hear that we're a farm, a lot of people assume, oh, you're producing all of your own food. Well, that's not the case for us. And I don't think it's the case for most people producing food. And self-sufficiency, as we define it here, doesn't speak to just what we're doing on the farm or within our gates. It really speaks to the larger connectedness to your community. And we think about self-sufficiency more on a community basis or a regional basis. Like, yes, we're growing a lot of food, but yes, we're also supporting a lot of farmers in our region that we become quite close to and depend on over the years, and thinking about what we can grow responsibly and well in a perennial polyculture, while buying eggs from the woman across the road who's doing it really well and something that she does as a business to be able to support her family. So I guess I'll just start with that, to think, not again, to not get overwhelmed by this idea that you have to grow all of your own food. It's really about thinking about how you can meet your caloric needs in the least impactful way possible. And that will include, for almost everybody, the need to develop these really strong relationships with food growers in their locale, in their region. And that, I think, alleviates a lot of the pressure and makes it, I think, a lot more, more attainable. Farmers markets, of course, in the States are becoming hugely popular, in part because people are able to have that, direct connection with people growing their food. And I think just making that connection on that person to person level, but then also, for people, if they're new to this, just getting started somewhere. And it doesn't have to be by buying a 12-acre farm and, planting all your own food. It's about just starting with getting your hands in the dirt, or planting one pot on the sill that allows you to just have an interaction with a plant that then becomes food for you. And I think then you can really start to have this, this big shift in your life, whereby you better understand where it is that your food comes from, and able to connect some of those dots, and less likely to then interact with the broken systems that industrial agriculture have brought to the surface. We're now realizing, as you suggested, the soil fertility loss, and the loss of water, and the poisoning of our soils, and the loss of nutrients in the food that's being grown commercially and even organically sometimes. And as soon as you can start to make some direct connections, I think you can start to walk and not run down that pathway, to figure out how you can change your diet and lifestyle to be one that's more responsible with regards to supporting the people that are doing it well, that are stewarding the land well, and not those that are essentially destroying it. And the stats are staggering. In 1900, only or around 40% of the U.S. population was directly involved in food production. It's down to 2%, and we're growing food on these mass monoculture farms that are growing food in really irresponsible ways, and trashing some of the best soils on earth, just so that we can grow a monoculture of just a few species that oftentimes goes towards feeding animals that weren't evolved to ingest that type of food. It's a big topic, but Yeah, I think just connecting both personally with the earth and getting your hands in the dirt, as well as better understanding where your food comes from. And yeah, going into the supermarket and asking a lot of hard questions, like, wow, like there's 70% of the items on supermarket shelves have some product, some corn in them of some sort, and understanding how that is impacting us, from a health standpoint, an economic standpoint, an environmental standpoint. I think there's a lot of hope in the food realm right now. I think a lot of people are interested in, buying locally and, figuring out how to eat food that's better for them and better for the planet. And it's a great place for people to start, because we all have to eat. Most of us eat multiple times a day. Great place to start to make some of those small lifestyle changes, which oftentimes are then the gateways into, bigger lifestyle changes that, hopefully eventually, lead you down this path of transforming your life in ways that, I think are really important for individuals as well as communities, and, the whole world, if you want to go that big.
I can appreciate that, Tim, and you touched on so much there, as you know, and even for me, I asked such a broad question, so it makes sense, but it brushed on some things that, when you think about having all the crops you need, or like that idea that you're gonna grow everything that you're gonna eat, it's you know not realistic necessarily. Like, I guess you could do it if you put your mind to it, but it just thinking in life in general, we're not all experts at everything. So, having that community of farmers, like you said, someone might do something really well, or they might have a property that's better situated for a certain thing. Maybe they have more shade, just in a really specific thing, and maybe someone has more sun, and or it's more sand in their soil, or whatever, and there's all these different things that could play into it. So it just feels right. And I even want to say, for me personally, I remember as I started to delegate more of things in my life so I could focus, one of the things I did get was help with our food, and even at points had a personal chef. And I was coaching them, so I was able to get this, and it worked into my lifestyle. But then as I started to notice more things, I was like, wait a minute, that's the part I want back in my life. And I'm going to delegate other things so that I could actually spend more time with that. And, my wife's done even a better job than myself. Like, I've gone and visited some of the farms, but she's taken our children, and we've met some of the farmers that we buy from, and really, like you said, got closer to our food. And I started to realize just the simple thing that, growing up, there was always these stories with my friends and even myself. It's like, nothing's better than grandma's cooking, and then when I look back generationally, if you go, like even you're saying, in the early 1900s, you go back 3 or 4 generations, the way that we treated food, the love that was put into it, I think we can't under describe that. And I've even noticed it in supply chains with some of my friends that are doing the right thing and paying the farmers in other countries really well, and helping, and just basically superseding other supply chains and just bringing that love. I can't tell you how much I can feel the difference inside my body, because it's all energy. And so I like that idea that you said, just on a simple thing, if you could get some herbs to put on the windowsill, or just plant a few plants in some pots and start to feel something that you can grow. I just wanted to highlight that, and just even that my own journey with food, to have it become a bigger part of my life than ever, really, like even beyond when I grew up. But we're third generation in the United States, Italian immigrants, and my grandparents definitely, no matter what size lot they had. My dad was just telling me that even they had less than an acre on one of the properties that they grew up with my grandfather, and he was actually selling produce, having enough for the family, like, and my dad couldn't believe it, like what they were producing on a small piece of land. So, and that has faded away, like you said.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in, developed countries like the U.S. I mean, I go to my mom's house in in the suburbs of upstate New York, and it's, I have these visions of, food forests and food everywhere. It's all lawn, of course, and those lawns are eating up a lot of water. In many cases, they're being laden with herbicides and pesticides, and all I can see is potential for, not that you're going to grow all your food on a small suburban lot, but the fact that the way that we're doing it now just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And increasingly, thankfully, there's a lot of people out there offering alternatives to people that make sense, not only economically, but, certainly from a health standpoint, but also aesthetically. People love their lawns. I don't want to, focus too much on this idea. And lawns are great for, playing baseball and kickball and running around with your kids. But there's so much potential just in those suburban areas where lawns are currently being grown to, to grow a little bit of food, to start reconnecting with your land. And yeah, a lot to say. But that's one area where I really focus. And I go back, and my mom, thankfully we go back and visit her every year. I have a garden there every year. We go back in the fall time, and that's another thing I think people don't realize, that again, going back to this idea of not having to grow at all. Well, we go back in the fall when most people are putting their gardens to bed, those that have them, and that's when I'm starting it back then. And even there, I grow 7 or 8 different species of greens and radishes, and able to harvest that in the short time that we're there, and doing a lot of fermentation. She's let me plant a bunch of apple and pear trees in her yard, and just those small acts, even though they're not going to be, reducing her grocery bill significantly anytime in the future, just that ability to reconnect with the land in that way, and provide examples perhaps to other people with what they could be doing with this space that they're spending a lot of time in, but usually on their riding lawnmower as they burn fossil fuels to keep the grass down so the neighbors don't get pissed off. And those changes are happening slowly, and I think they're important ones. Those permaculturalists working in the urban and suburban environment. Most people live in urban environments these days, and these changes have to take place in rural America, but certainly also in suburbia and in urban centers. This is work that needs to take place everywhere where human beings are.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. And this is an area that you teach, and this is a reason people can, and we'll put your website in the show notes and share that with people. And there's, we could spend out, as you know, hours and hours. I mean, you spent years learning this, and as you said at the beginning of this interview, you're still learning, and I think that's a life is learning. And so I appreciate you sharing just some of those introductory thoughts. And for those that haven't given thought to this, hopefully that experience has been good for you, and then you can seek more, and even from Tim, and maybe go take one of his classes, maybe go visit him in Costa Rica. And I guess I'm curious now, and as we kind of start to wind down, but I do want to hit on another topic that you brought up, is the community. And I think just from hearing you talk, I think that I appreciate this journey that we've taken today, like through your decision making to do what you're doing and go where you are, and then to talk about the farming. But how and thanks for sharing that you went into such a place that you had to travel 2 hours to check the internet. And now I'm so blessings that we could do this interview while you're on your land, and here we are, like in different parts of the world. But how I'm trying to think of the best way to make this simple, because this again could be so broad. But how has it worked with the community and bringing people in? Because I see what you do. You have people there locally that are probably in your life quite frequently, and then you have people coming and going, but you've created this space to allow whatever that is for long-term learning, where people stay with you for a year, or maybe they stay for a couple of weeks. How have you created that kind of ecosystem to have that community of human beings to gather in that way? Is there Is there a highlight or some learning on that that you can pick apart a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a good question and an extremely important one. Moving abroad, my family's mostly in the States, and making that step to go away really necessitated um, the, it necessitated us having to build a community to replace the one that I guess we were leaving at the time. And so building community is such a big part of this story, and a big part of, I think, what people need to be thinking about if they're going to be making large lifestyle changes or going somewhere else to live in pursuit of happiness. And without community, I think that's really difficult. Community can look different based on who you are and what your definition is, but I think especially in these times, people are increasingly aware that living alone isn't for everybody. It's not healthy for a lot of people, and that getting back to this idea of building healthy community is a critical piece of it. And in a place as dynamic as ours, as you suggested, we have locals that are friends that work with us, that we employ. We have people that come in from the outside who take our workshops or live with us for a year in an apprenticeship. And there can be a lot of movement in and out of that space, and that can, without really good organization, create an itinerant, transient, sometimes hectic environment, unless you really have clear agreements and, I guess, what I'll refer to as invisible structures. That's the term that's used in permaculture lingo, to really have these invisible structures in place to be able to deal with conflict, to be able to make good decisions, to be able to govern yourself, to be able to, to do financial analysis that brings you to good decisions. And I think the take-home message is just really clear environments and expectations with the people that are coming into your space, whether that be an employee, whether that be a friend, a family member, an apprentice, an intern, a workshop participant. There is that common thread, I think, that requires really good communication prior to going into an agreement with somebody. And we've learned this, I think, the hard way in a lot of cases, having these oral agreements with people, and your best buddy, and you have a pat on the back, and you agree to something, and then when you look back on that conversation a few years down the road or a decade down the road, you have an entirely different memory than perhaps the other person that you were talking with does. And just being able to go back and refer in some way, shape, or form, in the form of a document, usually, what you talked about and agreed to, I think, is really important for our success. Really clearly outlining to the year-long apprentices who are applying to our program what it is that they're going to be getting and what it is that we're going to be expecting of them. And just having really good, this is a little bit of the kind of the corporate piece that at first I kind of rejected, as I started to pursue this alternative lifestyle. Like, the corporate world is evil. I'm trying to get away from it. And I don't believe that any longer. Good corporations definitely function well when they're good, well organized, and when they're making good decisions, and when they have good structures in place. There's some pieces of that I continue to move away from, but what I can take from those experiences and entities is this, idea of having very clear communication and clear agreements with partners, so that you can have a healthy ecosystem and a healthy community, and one that's resilient and one that's able to resolve conflict, which is inevitable when you get people in the same space. And just really spending the time and investing the energy and getting that part right. Because growing food can be hard, building your own house can be hard, but attainable. You can plant a tree and learn how to take care of it and grow food. You can learn carpentry and build your own house, even though it might be challenging. But the people part really is the hardest part of developing a successful business like the one that we have, and that requires a lot of time and energy into developing these invisible structures, which allow people to live together in a way that that's healthy. And people looking to make these changes are looking for happiness oftentimes, and happiness requires a lot of hard work on that front, just making sure that everybody is working within the same framework.
That makes sense, and I have a feeling, and I've done it too. Like you said, we learned the hard way. I think it comes from that loving, the feeling of love and wanting to be loved, love and wanting to trust. And I think, I had to differentiate being clear and writing things out and having those expectations and trust are two different things. Like at the beginning, I thought, oh, this means I'm being untrusting because I have to be this clear and I have to write everything out. And so I resisted that because I'm like, oh, I'm being a jerk because now I'm asking for a legal agreement that I never liked reading. But I've found exactly what you found. And I tell people this right away. I'm doing this because I love you, because
Yeah.
of the relationships I've lost, because I wasn't clear. And there's a saying, I forget what psychologist said it. They said, you can take a family and interview all the children and they'll all have different parents, even though they were born biologically from the same parents. But that's how much the memories are different. And we all, grow and journey differently. And so I found, and thank you for sharing your experience with this, because I found that being more clear and creating those expectations actually survives the relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, it's you're doing everybody a favor, and I had the same feeling. Just what you outlined resonates with me deeply. So yeah, well said.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. And, um, as man, there's so much. Like I'm holding myself back because I have so many different things. So I'm sure we're going to continue to talk. I hope, and I'm so happy that you took the time today to share a little bit of your life and your experience, and I hope that just anyone listening out there that's thinking about making change, and it doesn't mean that you're going to sell everything and move to a country in a rural area, but just I think we all have these things inside of ourselves, and maybe we're holding back because we think other people, thinking of other people, thinking of our community, thinking about what we're supposed to do, quote unquote. So whatever that is, whatever change that is, hopefully maybe you were inspired to, take it, seriously. And then little by little, you can have whatever you want. Just like you said, Tim, right now in the closing, here's, you could build a house, you could learn to care for a tree, you could learn so many things. It's just, what is it that you would like? I'm curious if you were, for a closing thought, Tim, if there was like one piece of advice, if you were talking to someone, it was the last time you were going to talk to them, but just on this front of choosing your life,
Mm.
um, because now here you are living the life that you dreamed, I suppose. Is that accurate to say?
I mean, yeah,
Close
no
enough.
regrets. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so then what would you say for someone that's, you know, looking to make a decision? Well, if you were to give me one piece of advice, and this is the last time we spoke, what would you think would be most important to share with me and as a closing thought?
Yeah, I think something that came up as you were chatting there, we moved out of the country and changed locales entirely and became expats in Central America. And I think as humans, we have this, grass is greener syndrome, where we always feel like it's better over there or somewhere else. And sometimes you do have to get up and go and change places to be able to find happiness. But I think what I would suggest to people is just maybe trying it where they are now and maybe making those changes internally and within their current community, even though it might not seem at first glance as the best place to do it. I think it requires the least amount of energy, external energy. I think internal energy. I think if people can kind of reconfigure their thoughts about where it is that they are, oftentimes it's more sustainable to do it that way. It's more financially attainable to do it that way, to think about how you can kind of recreate your life within the space and the place where you find yourself and start to experiment with those changes. And like you said, there's a lot of people that kind of up and go, especially during this pandemic. They have a house, they sell it, and all of a sudden they're in Costa Rica and they land and they buy a really pretty piece of property with a view out to the ocean. And then, reality sets in and they're like, oh shit, I didn't do any of my homework and I don't have anybody within a few miles that I can call a friend, and I don't want to lead anybody down a false path and thinking that they have to get up and leave their country to do what we did to follow their dream. I would say start small, start at home, dip your toe into the water there, and then go from there. So start small, don't get sucked into the grass is greener syndrome, which I think so many of us fall prey to, including myself, and see what resources are there right in your own community and start right there.
That's beautiful, Tim. And I know we're taking this episode a little longer, but I wanted to add one thought to that I think is important. And I think you hit on a big thing. So one of my teachers, Carl Buchheit, he talks about the levels of change. And the first level of change is environment. It's the easiest one to change. Like you said, you could just like jump up and go, but it's not, it's not the deeper change. And so the layers are environment is one of the lowest. Then above that is behaviors. If you go to a new environment, it doesn't necessarily change your behaviors. Like you said, it might be a new spark or excitement, but then your old behaviors will set back in. Whereas if you change your behaviors, you could actually stay in the same environment and actually have a different life. And you don't have to move, to your point. And then above behaviors is capabilities. When you have more capabilities, your behaviors tend to change, and then your environment changes. And then above capabilities, he would say our beliefs. If our beliefs change, then we can believe. Like even for me with music, when I was a kid, I got picked on a few times that I wasn't good at music. So I threw it to the wayside. And now in my adult life, I'm embracing that again because I changed my belief that, I can learn music. And then I changed my capabilities, that changed my behaviors, it changed my environment, literally, because now I make music when people come to my house. so it's interesting, those layers. So I so appreciate you highlighting that. And it just dawned on me like how important that really is. And I like your idea, what you just said to close this is, just start where you are. That's a beautiful saying.
Yeah. Love it. Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Tim. I appreciate you so much. And we'll put notes for people if they want to reach out to you or learn more about all the things that you've done. We'll make that available.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. It's been a real pleasure, and hope we can connect again soon.
Yeah, me too. And for everyone out there, let us know what was most valuable about this episode. We love to hear your feedback. If you have ideas of other things you want to learn, please let us know. And as always, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom. Thanks for listening to the More Business, More Life podcast. I hope you got value. And if you did, we have so many more things for you at stevenapolitan.com. You'll be able to connect with us on social media. We are active. You can ask us questions. And then on top of that, I want to give you a really big gift. And it truly is. We want to give so much value. We have an offering. It's a program called Clear Path to Customers. It's the same way that we attract wow clients and only working with the right people, the people we want to. And it's transformed my business into millions more in revenue with the right people and my clients. And we're doing it absolutely free. So you can go to stevenapolitan.com and grab that. You just got to put in your information. We'll send it to you promptly. And that again is on stevenapolitan.com. I look forward to having you on the next show. Until then, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom.